Hey, Black Petersburg. So I am here with the Honorable. I'm going to call you Honorable because you are my elder, Miss Hope Walton. And I am going to allow her to introduce herself, and then I'm going to share with you guys why we are sitting down today having this conversation with Miss Walton during History Month, March 2024. Okay? Go ahead and introduce yourself.
And I'm Hope Nadine Walton, and I'm from the Petersburg area.
Okay. And Hope, I learned after attending a UVA Ridley Foundation fundraiser, she was being honored there. She mentioned something during her speech that caught my attention, that she is the first official Black valedictorian of the first year that Petersburg High School was desegregated.
Yes.
So we wanted to bring that to the forefront and tell your story, because it's long overdue.
Definitely, I would say so. But just to give you a backdrop, as an 8th grader, Judge Marriage, and a lot of people are familiar with him because he was actually threatened when he went through this freedom of choice. He offered Black and white students freedom of choice. So that meant I was at the all-Black high school, Peabody High, and the white students attended Petersburg High. And so he gave us the choice. If Black students wanted to go to Petersburg High, they could do it. And I would say only about a handful of folks went to Petersburg High. The rest of us remained at the all-Black high school of Peabody. And so when our junior year came about, in fact, it was about May of our junior year, that's when he announced that, freedom of choice is not working, and so therefore he changed my high school to a junior high, and then everyone had to go to Petersburg High. And so, needless to say, we had already bought our class rings that spring of 1970, and so we entered Petersburg High in the fall, and it was definitely a tumultuous academic year. We had our first African-American homecoming queen and court, and I was at the game when all of this happened, didn't even know that apparently some of the white students from the high school were throwing rocks at the court. And so that was on a Friday. So I found out about it that Monday when we came back to school, and so that's when we had a race riot there. My mother was in the hospital at that time, and so her girlfriend came to pick me up. I could not find my brother. And then we found out later that his teacher had locked him up in the classroom, so he came home later. And so
his white teacher?
I'm not sure who his teacher was at that particular time, but she locked them up in their classroom.
For safety or
for safety? For safety.
Okay.
Yes, because folks were just tumbling and rumbling all around the school. The school was closed for 3 days, but it was a rough time in general because that was the first time in which a large contingency of Black students attended Petersburg High, and in fact there were a number of students, white students in particular, and their families. They did not like the idea of the integration. And so it was years later when I taught SAT prep at William & Mary for 18 years, and so it was this huge article, and I don't remember if it appeared in the Progress Index or the Richmond Times, but it was many, many pages, and it talked about what had happened during that time. And so the average person who would read that and who had not experienced it like I did, they wouldn't pick up that, Petersburg all of a sudden lost population, and Colonial Heights gained population. And so some of the white families brought their kids, they moved over to Colonial Heights. Others had them go to parochial schools, or they sent them off to private schools, or they just went to Petersburg High, but they just didn't really want to go to Petersburg High.
And this took place in 71 when you guys integrated.
Well, actually the fall of 1970 when we integrated.
And then you graduated in 71.
In 71, yes.
So that was the climate of taking all these kids from Peabody and putting them in. Do you remember how big your graduating class was?
It was 500 plus, about 560
And how many of those would you say were African American students?
Now that I don't have the percentage, but we had a pretty large class that came from Peabody. But the thing that was really distinctive that I remember, because we had just, or the school system had just renovated Peabody. And I've always thought that the older Petersburg High School was not a good building. It was kind of dilapidated in my opinion, but they made our school a junior high. And then, as I said earlier, everyone had to go there. So it was really kind of interesting in terms of the teachers who ended up coming to Petersburg High from Peabody. I can remember my math teacher, he wanted to be the chair of the math department. So it was a lot of bickering and what have you. And so they made another guy who had been at Petersburg High all along as the chair of the math department. But I remember him, Mr. Walker, because he was a mentor. He said, let us take a test. He told this story years ago, but of course they didn't want to do that. And so, but not only that, I guess around mid-year is when we were called to the principal's office, and that's when we were notified that because of the two schools had merged, we were going to have 2 valedictorians and 2 salutatorians. And so I would have been actually the valedictorian from Peabody, and then Deborah Rainey, she was in my class. She was the salutatorian, the black salutatorian. And then they had Pam Shell, who is now Pam Shell Baskerville, and who was who became a chief judge here in the circuit court of Petersburg. And she and I have known each other for a good bit of time. And so it was Betsy. I don't remember Betsy's last name, but she was the other salutatorian. And so when they summoned us to the office, that's when they, laid this information on us. And so by the time we came back, because everybody was saying, ooh, what happened with you all having to go to the principal's office. But once the white students found out that we were going to have some black commencement speakers, they submitted and disseminated a petition saying that we don't want, and they used the N-word, we don't want such and such people at as commencement speakers. So that was a big mess right there. But the principal, he made them apologize on the PA system. But they had circulated this piece of paper all around the school system. So it was interesting. But I think also it's important to let you know what Petersburg was like prior to us going to Petersburg High, because see, as a first grader, I actually attended an integrated school system. My daddy was in the Army, and so we went to Germany, Hanau, Germany. And so we had about 4 African American students, 1 Asian guy, 1 Puerto Rican, and the rest of the class mates were white students. In fact, we had a young white woman who was our teacher, and every Tuesday we had a German woman who would come and teach us the language. Oh, nice. And so I learned and picked up the German language really quickly. And then I came back to Petersburg, and there was no German in the curriculum. Even at the high school, it came years later after I left high school. Same thing, we didn't have calculus, for example.
So tell me this, Ms. Walton, when it comes, did you come to Petersburg because of your dad being in the military?
Oh, no, I'm from my family. My mother's side of the family, they were from Petersburg. Okay. My daddy is from Barbados.
Okay.
And so he joined and he lived most of his time in New York later on in life, and so he joined the military.
Okay.
Yeah.
So home is here.
Yes.
You're from here. You went for first grade in Germany, and then you
second
came
grade
back here.
Through my 11th grade year, I was in a segregated school system. But I think the thing that was pretty, it's not necessarily fascinating, but I think it needs to be said, is that we had great mentors from amongst our teachers. People like Mrs. Dina Abbott and her sister, which was interesting. She and I were really close. Both of them came to my wedding. And so Mrs. Hawkins, here I was, a second grade student, and she knew how much I loved to read. And so, during those times, the classes would come so many times to go to the library, but I was always in the library anyhow. And so even when she, if I was coming with the class, she said, "Hope, I got this new book I want you to read." And so my mother and I got that from my mother. She was an avid reader. We would, when we came back from Germany, we would go to Petersburg Public Library, but we also would go to Fort Lee, Fort Lee's library. So we'd have a stack of books and from each area, and the Fort Lee library system, they allowed you to check out albums. And so they only had Motown sound, country, classical, R&B sort of thing. But let me do a backdrop too on my experiences in Germany. I have to say this: my mother and dad, for some reason, I don't know why they decided to do this, but they enrolled me in square dancing lessons. And so here I was, the only black kid in a sea of white soldiers and their families. We had lots of German families there. And so that's why I appreciate all kinds of music, even country, because I started that process. And maybe that's why they gave me that type of experience. But and we also were able to get jazz albums as well from Fort Lee. And so we definitely had a lot of mentors among Peabody. As I mentioned, George Walker, Grace Norbury was a very good friend. In fact, we kept up our friendship even when I came back home in 1987. She was our chemistry teacher, and we won the state fair for science and math with her. It was only about 6 of us who went to the state fair. And then T.T. James, she has since passed, as well as Grace Norbury. But T.T. James, I saw her a couple of months. She came to my mother's class reunion, and she told me she still had my math notebook.
Oh, wow.
But she was really special, and so we had some really special teachers who really cared and nurtured and really mentored us throughout that whole process, but especially during that tumultuous year as seniors at Petersburg High.
I mean, it's hard to imagine nowadays to think back to being the first to have to go through that experience of, all these white kids are not used to sharing classrooms, sharing space, sharing bathrooms, sharing any of that with African American students, and then vice versa. So it was two separate worlds, and it's still playing out to this day.
But you also had some teachers who were from the Petersburg school system my senior year who didn't really think that black students were competitive. For some reason, they thought because we had gone to the all-black high school that we weren't at the same level as the white students who attended Petersburg High, but they quickly found out that was wrong. Yes, because we showed them.
So how many years did you attend Peabody? It was a high school when you first started there, so you were there
Well,
from
I was there from 8th through my junior year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you were only at Petersburg High School for 1 year.
Yeah.
Okay, and you graduated. And walk us through the actual day of commencement, and was it tense, or like the day that you actually graduated and were in cap and gown and were you allowed to give your speech?
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Okay.
And so another person who was special in my life was Mrs. Marie Manigo.
Okay.
And I had always heard these wonderful things about her as a teacher, but for some reason I wasn't able to get her until my last semester in college. And so we became really good friends, and she really worked with me too on my commencement speech. And we used to always laugh and joke because I said, for some reason they never gave me you, and I had heard all these wonderful things, but I had learned so much from her just that last semester. And a girlfriend of mine, Tyrus Collins, we were very close, and so we would sometimes go and sit at her house and play music and just have deep conversations. She's a really and still is a very deep person. You need to interview her because Mrs. Manigo was definitely a special person in our lives. That was her name at that time, and it has since changed. She has remarried, and I can't remember her last name. But anyhow, commencement went really well. Nice. Our speeches were well received and what have you. And by the way, too, I took the toughest curriculum at Petersburg. Well, the whole school system, because at that time the state Commonwealth of Virginia had this scientific collegiate curriculum. So that meant that you had to take math, science, history every semester. You also had to take 2 years of 2 foreign languages, and so it was quite. It was a top curriculum, and then the one below that was kind of like the liberal arts or collegiate. They had a collegiate one, and then liberal arts, in which you took a lot of English and foreign languages. And so the foreign language curriculum really prepared me when I went off to school at UVA, because I did exempt one semester. At UVA, you had a 4-semester requirement of foreign language, and so I took Spanish and Latin in high school, and I continued in Spanish at the university level.
Nice. So your choice to attend UVA, what was that your top choice? Did you have other schools that you wanted to attend?
Well, I actually attended quite a few college information sessions during that fall semester, and saw some of the film clips, and I'm laughing because when I became an admissions officer at UVA, that's what we had at that time, film clips. We didn't have all this modern stuff that you're used to now in terms of the technology. But I attended their information system and saw the pictures of the school, and they don't consider their school as a campus. It's the grounds. So we grew up with that. That's the very distinction there compared to the other schools that I have actually worked at. And so so that was a good experience in that sense. Now, what was the other question?
My question was, what made you choose UVA?
Okay. You know, well, after attending a number of information sessions, I was intrigued by the fact that UVA was considered to be one of the flagship institutions in the Commonwealth of Virginia, but it also I was intrigued by the fact that I would be in the second class of women. And so,
what do you mean by that, second class of women? That's the second
UVA
time
was all male. Was an all male school prior to 1970, and I have many girlfriends, male friends who, and the women who were in the first class of women.
Wow.
And so I was in the second class of women. And in terms of the composition of my class, there were only 98 black students in that class, and only 42 of us graduated 4 years later. The male-female ratio at that time was about 9 to 1.
Wow.
So I didn't have any complaints about that, because the men really treated us special. In fact, a lot of the men prior to 1970, they had dated the women from Albemarle High School and Charlottesville High School, or they would go to some of the all-female colleges in Virginia, like Sweetbriar, Radford, that Holland, that sort of thing. And so they were really glad to have women at the school, and so they really treated us well. And the men really connected with the women in my class, especially. They really liked the women in my class, and I always teased
What was your major when you went to UVA?
Undergrad, I thought that I wanted to be a dentist, and but I changed up, and I ended up getting my undergrad degree, BS, in speech pathology and audiology. And then I went straight through to grad school, in which I earned a degree in it was actually in special ed, but with a concentration with mental retardation. And so,
did you ever work in that space?
Yes.
You did?
Actually, I did some volunteering as well at a trainable, it was called Trainable Mentally Retarded house, in which they were living there, and I did some volunteer work there first when I was in the graduate, or actually in my last year of undergrad, I did that, and then I, after I finished the graduate program, I I was interviewing all along, but I interviewed with Western State Hospital, which is a mental institution, and I created the first full-day educational program for, at that time they called them mentally retarded, emotionally disturbed adolescents. And so they were 14 to 21 years old. And that was a real interesting job, just having to work with that clientele. But in my last year there, I stayed there 2 years, I also taught autistic kids, and that was pretty challenging for sure. And so then after that, I spent 1 year as a career education planner for the Charlottesville public school system, where I, and that's another person who was a mentor to me at Peabody High, Mrs. Vivian Williamson. She was then working for the State Department of Education, and so I wrote a grant, a career education grant for the Charlottesville school system that was funded at close to $25,000, and so she was over that grant. I believe her boss was Dr. Bosher at that time. So anyhow, I convinced 5 teachers to embed career education in their curriculum. And one of my dear friends, Sylvia Terry, she and her husband taught science, and Sylvia taught English. So they were 2 of the 3 who incorporated career education to their curriculum plans. And then we also created a career education program in the library that's still intact at Charlottesville High School with some modifications. And then I got the phone call from UVA before we even did the training, and they wanted me to leave right away because it was in the midst of their recruitment season. So I started, it was around October 8th in which I started at UVA, and at that time it was one other African-American admissions. We were assistant dean of admissions, but I knew that my first year was going to be her last year, and so so I went ahead and recruited Sylvia Terry. Sylvia Terry became the other assistant dean of admissions, and we made some significant accomplishments in that office in terms of significantly increasing the number of students who came to the school, as well as black students. All of us had different areas in which we excelled in. You know, some persons might be recruiting everyone, but they might deal with AP. And so we recruited everyone, but we also gave special attention and consideration to trying to increase the number of black students at UVA, because there were only 200 black folks at UVA when I there.
Out of how many?
At that time, I'm not sure what that number was. Might have been about 9,000, but I'm not absolutely sure. I can't remember that. And so, but then, you know, the male-female ratio, as I said, was 9-1. So it was real different. That's for sure. But only 200 black folks, and that included about 5 African-American faculty. That was it.
Wow.
And so, you know, my experiences at UVA, we certainly tried to, we supported the admissions office, but we certainly tried to do our part in terms of increasing the number of African-American students to at least try to have a critical mass. But also, we were under the desegregation gun. The Office of Civil Rights, they mandated that all of the predominantly white state-supported institutions bring in a certain number of black students, and then schools like Virginia State University and Norfolk State University, the 2 state-supported HBCUs, they had to bring in a certain number of white students. And so those were some tumultuous times as well. And so I stayed as an assistant dean of admissions at UVA for 8 years, and then I became the director, came back home and became the director of admissions at Virginia State University. And so we made some significant strides there. I stayed at the school for 4 years, but in terms of admissions, within 1.5 years, we had the highest percentage of applications in the entire Commonwealth of Virginia, which was a 64% increase. Wow. No one thought that could happen at Virginia State. And so I think some of the other schools, maybe UVA had a 12% or 7% at that time, but no one came anywhere close to 64%. And then the following year, we had a 39% increase, and that exceeded everybody in the Commonwealth as well. We recruited our first Truman Scholar. Wow. And a lot of folks wanted to know how on earth, some of my competitors, they wanted to know how in the world did you get this guy, because everybody had recruited him as well in the state. And he was just a brilliant student, but he was a double legacy. His mother and daddy had attended Virginia State University. So in addition to getting the Truman Scholarship monies, the Northern Virginia alumni chapter gave him some additional monies. That's how we were able to get it with being able to combine that sort of thing. And then we also became seventh in the nation in terms of receiving the highest number of SAT score reports from black students. Virginia State had never been on the radar. In fact, the guy from College Board called me. He was so excited. He said, "Hope, you're number 7th in the nation." And a girlfriend of mine who was at North Carolina Central, she said her president beat on her, figuratively speaking, because he wanted to know, how the hell did Virginia State even surpass us? This was North Carolina Central. North Carolina Central moved to maybe 8 or 9, and we were number 7. And so she and I, we really had a lot of fun with that. So we did some great things. I created a wonderful alumni mentoring program. I hope that is still intact, in which we really worked closely with the alumni. They helped us in our recruitment of students, but they mentored the students that they recruited. And so, say for example, if we couldn't make it to a college fair in Philly, the alumni chapter would go and they would collect the inquiry cards, send those to us. But what happened, they kept in touch with these students all through high school. So
tell me this, Hope.
Yeah.
How, because I'll tell you what I'm hearing when it comes to being the first black valedictorian at Petersburg High School, attending from 2nd grade all the way through to 11th grade.
Yes.
All black school.
Yes.
Okay. You were going to go to UVA for speech pathology and mental,
I didn't know that at the time that was going to be my major, but yes, that's what I ended up in. Yes.
That's what you ended up in. How would you say Petersburg, your time here, being from here, seeing it through your lens of being shaped by a black community, being educated by black educators, being mentored by black mentors, and then going into a predominantly white space like UVA, how did that shape your influence, or like when you were recruiting those students, and like how did that, what make the connection there for me?
It shaped us tremendously, but not only that, just having that experience in Germany. First of all, knowing that I could compete and to excel as a first grader, because those kids were from all over the world, and so that was a good foundation. And then coming to an all-black elementary through high school was significant in terms of my development, because we had teachers who cared, nurtured, and mentored us. And so things like that, but also that carried me through in terms of helping me to excel, and because we had plenty of people who were rah-rahing and motivating us to excel, and not only that, they mentored us to do well, and so that prepared me for UVA. And so when I went, when I attended UVA with that small number of black folks there, it was either my first or second Sunday at the school. This white professor came to visit me in the dormitories, and that made a world of difference to me. He left his family to come see how I was doing. And I said, wow, this is really precious that he would take the time. And I was the only black in my suite dorms in that whole part of that building, and so it really made a difference. But another person, and his name, I never remembered his last name because so many years have passed us by. But he was a professor in the English department. But another person who was really front and center in my development too was Dr. Linwood Jacobs, who recently passed. I believe it was in December, and so I went to his memorial in January. But he just gave wise counsel to all of the students at UVA, and so those two people were really began that to continue that foundation that I received from elementary and through high school in terms of the care and nurturing that we received from our black teachers at Peabody and at the Virginia Avenue Elementary School, because I grew up in that area in which we attended Virginia Avenue, and whereas other students who came to Peabody later on, they might have come from Westview and other areas. And so I think they really furthered that foundation. So by the time I actually worked in undergraduate admissions, I felt it was my duty, in a sense, for me to have that exemplify and to have that provide that type of care, nurturing and mentoring. And so that was one of the things that Sylvia Cherry and I convinced her when she came on board. I said, let's start visiting some of the dorms that, of the students that we recruited. And so we did this on the weekend. We would recruit during the weekday, and then on Saturdays and Sundays we would leave our families and go visit the dorms. And it meant the world to these kids too, so much so, and we did not even imagine that this could have happened. They ended up joining our student admissions committee. We didn't recruit them for anything. And so that gave us the opportunity to nurture, care, and mentor these students. And so I have carried forward that throughout my higher education career, from working at UVA in admissions, being the director of admissions at Virginia State, and then after 4 years moving on into another field of academic skills, in which I went to the University of Richmond, and I've been there for almost 33 years. And but when they hired me, I created the university's academic skills center, which provided academic coaching in all the traditional academic skills areas such as critical thinking, critical reading, information processing, time management, stress management, that sort of thing. And then I created the very first peer advisors and mentors program called PAM. And PAM is 31 years old, but that program, not only did the students excel, they typically had a mean GPA of 3.8. They were leaders. We helped them in terms of enhancing their leadership skills in that program. They just did a really phenomenal job. And the retention rates of the students in our PAM program, the mentees, they actually were mentored by upperclassmen for a full year, their freshman year. And then they went on, but so many of those students ended up staying in PAM to become mentors. So many of them, it's almost like a and retention experts have talked about this. Peer mentoring programs tend to be a self-generating process in which the mentees end up becoming the mentors, and that's what they did. But the retention rates were phenomenal. Wow. They actually exceeded the university's retention rates for 26 years out of a 30-year period, and so I'm very proud of that. And so we also did some great work with the faculty and have continued to work closely with the faculty in terms of metacognition, doing workshops, partnering with them, with all of the different departments and what have you. And so I stayed in the student development area for 32 years, and last summer all of the centers, the writing, the speech, the academic skills centers, and a few others, they then moved over to the academic affairs, where we're under the provost and an interim executive director. So, but I spent all of my time in the student development division, and where I really continued to grow and made a lot of significant accomplishments during that time frame.
Nice. Yeah. So in closing, what is your fondest memory of Petersburg? Being here, somebody here that you've had friends with or mentored by, or like, what is the moment that sticks out more than any other moment when you think of Petersburg?
I would say a couple of persons, particularly Mrs. T.T. James. My family, I lost a sister. She was kidnapped and killed, thrown in a well, 1968. And it was a rough time for my family. And Mrs. James, she picked me up on a Sunday, never forget it, and took me over to her home in Ettrick. And then fast forward 30 plus years later, I ended up living in the Ettrick community. And so she brought me over there for dinner. But to have a teacher to take time to do stuff like that, it just meant the world to me once again. But also, I have to double back on Mrs. Manigault. I mean, although we didn't really connect until my senior year at Petersburg High, she made a major impact on my life as a student, but also both of those teachers in general, but as well as Dina Abbott and Mrs. Hawkins, the librarian I was telling you about. I guess they helped to lay that foundation too, in terms of what are you going to do to pay it back forward? Yes, we have done these things for you. We have cared about you. We've nurtured you, And so I took it to heart. And so I said, okay, I got to do this. This is my responsibility to do that. Because, see, I didn't just recruit a kid to either UVA or Virginia State. I got to know the families. I would check on the students. And so if I went to Atlanta or Philly, I would call the parent and say, hey, your son or daughter, they're doing pretty well. And I would always get invited to dinner with either alums or with parents.
Nice.
So I really got to know the parents throughout my admissions career.
Nice.
And so I would say that those teachers in general, they helped to lay the foundation because they were all about excelling academically, but also giving back to the community.
I love it. So in your closing remarks, what would you like to say to our viewers that took the time to watch your interview? I'm sure there's things that you mentioned. They're like, I didn't know that. So please let us know how this interview reaches your heart. Let us know if you have any questions for Ms. Walton. I'll be sure to get them to her as we publish this. But in closing remarks, you're talking to the current Petersburg community. What do you want them to carry on if you're passing the torch to them?
Well, first to love your community. I love the Petersburg area. I was glad to return home in 1987, but to do some things similar to what I did, because there are so many teachers, ministers who have done a lot to encourage me and others within the community, but to pay it back forward as well. To give back. It's not always about you and what have you. But another thing I would say too, because I'm an educator, is that it's okay to be into all this social media, but I would say and then try to encourage the young folks to take time to read, because that's how you're going to not accept everything that you might see on a TikTok or Facebook or whatever. You have to become a critical reader, a critical thinker. Even your parents might take you down the wrong road. You got to think for yourself, or peer pressure can do. And so throughout my time frame here in Petersburg, I didn't succumb to peer pressure. I made my own decision. I was independent as a youngster, an independent thinker as a youngster, and I would like to encourage more of the young folks to do that and to read for information, for pleasure, and for knowledge. Don't just stay on the social media outlets and just accept everything you read, because everything is not correct. And just like I said to you, that big article that talked about the shift in the demographics in Petersburg and Colonial Heights, I used that article when I was teaching SAT, and I said, and I developed questions, and I said, okay, well, why do you think that the population shifted in Petersburg? Because most people would not have known it. And so it shifted because a lot of whites went to Colonial Heights. But nobody, the average person, who was reading that, they might not have picked that up. And so that's what I'm talking about in terms of critical thinking and critical reading. Now look, common sense is not so common anymore, unfortunately, but it's a lot of people who don't have common sense. It's really incredible. And so you have to also learn that as well as become a critical reader and a critical thinker.
Nice. Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely. This has been a pleasure.
Likewise. I enjoyed your speech at the Ridley Foundation. I'll tag that so you guys can learn a little bit more about that. And if it's okay with you, I'll share the video that you share with me from your speech there.
Sure. And I just want to let you know that they had technological difficulties. And so they did not complete the entire conversation that I had, but most of it, I think, was only about half, maybe, of what. And so that was a special award as well, to have been acknowledged to receive that award from the Richmond chapter of UVA's Walter Ridley Trailblazing.
That's how I met her, and that's how I learned of her contribution here in Petersburg, and I just wanted to bring her story to us all here, and let's keep it alive. Let's share it. Let us let our other community members know about Miss Hope Walton and what she has done from Germany. Well, from Petersburg to Germany, from Germany back to Petersburg, then to Charlottesville to UVA, and then Virginia State, and now at UVR as an educator, an admissions recruiter, and a mentor to many.
No, administrator now, because I got out of admissions at after I left Virginia State.
And
so
at U of R administration.
Yeah, and I forgot to tell you, I taught MCAT for 15 years, MCAT prep. That was at University of Richmond.
Okay. Yeah. And that was a big part of those 32 years.
Yes.
Nice.
Yes.
So, I mean, let's keep her story alive. Let's share it. Let's let others know that, you know, reading is necessary. Bigger than reading, like, pay it forward. If someone took out the time to love on you, to care about you, and even if they didn't, maybe you get to be that person for someone else. That's what we stand here at Black Petersburg. We have a great example and a product of that, you know, of all these wonderful mentors that I got to track down and see if I can get some interviews with. But thank you so much for allowing me to interview you. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll be back here soon with another interview.